It is a growing short list, whittled down from an epic list, of the best PC games ever. This is, by far, the toughest best of list I've ever had to show. And I've written my fair share. Number 10. Portal. Portal was one of the first games to really challenge players to solve riddles in three-dimensional space. As a fan of adventure games growing up, this was like next-level stretching of my gray matter. The other main thing that the original Portal has that Portal 2 lost in its multi-platform translation was puzzles that also rewarded quick reactions and fast aim. Presumably, these types of puzzles were regrettably absent from the sequel, because such fast and accurate feats aren't as easy to repeat on controllers. But as an old-school shooter fan, they rewarded the types of skills I'd been honing since Wolfenstein 3D. Number 9. Prey. It's a game that empowers players to try new things, not just in gameplay but also in character, and make narrative decisions that have big and often unforeseen consequences. The minute-to-minute gameplay regularly and seamlessly shifts between tense and intense, plus there's a clever, but subtle, risk/reward upgrade system that makes you trade power fantasy for greater vulnerability. It is in every sense of the word a modern-day classic, and one of the best action RPGs ever made. In fact, it's so good that game-breaking bugs weren't enough to stop me from finishing it. Number 8. HOMEWORLD. Relic Entertainment's HOMEWORLD series was so far ahead of its time, its forward-thinking design hasn't been replicated or bested to this day. While the world was, and still is, content to have strategy battles in 2 dimensions, Relic's 3D battles, rock-paper-scissors unit design, and meaningful formations were iconic features. On top of this, your units carried over between missions, which was either a positive or negative, depending on how well you performed in the last mission. It was great if you dominated, but it sucked if your forces had been dwindled. You wouldn't know it at the time, but starting a new mission after a close win might mean you don't have a force that's capable of withstanding a surprise attack at the start of the next mission. You basically had to restart. Number 7. Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. At the time, the graphics were top-notch, and the Star Wars soundscape was understandably pitch-perfect. However, the real shining star was the sheer depth of gameplay mechanics and a plot twist so awesome that even 14 years after release, I won't mention for risk of spoiling it. It's still that good. Given the shaky quality of Star Wars games, and their stories, were relevant, in recent years, it's important to flag that the expectation that there were still amazing Star Wars stories to tell after the release of the divisive prequel movies started with Knights of the Old Republic. Number 6. Deus Ex. I loved and had finished this game before I even knew how to pronounce its title. At this point of my gaming life, I was almost exclusively a fan of real-time strategy and first-person shooter games. I'd wager the only reason I even took a punt on Deus Ex was because I mistakenly thought it was an FPS. How wrong I was, and how glad I was to be so wrong. The first thing that grabbed me was the conspiracy theory-rich storytelling. The next thing was the player empowerment through gameplay choices. This'll likely sound silly in light of the countless action RPGs that have been released in the last 17 years, but I was blown away by the fact that I could hack a door open, steal a code to open it or blow it off its hinges. However, more important than this was how I was genuinely stressed out by the branching storyline, to the point where I created specific capital letter saves at important junctures. Sometimes it was just to test what would happen. Other times, it was so I could return to that decision and see how the game played out afterwards. Deus Ex hasn't aged so well visually, mods can address that to a certain extent, but its gameplay is still incredible today. Number 5. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. The thing I'll always chuckle about with The Witcher 3 is how much I love the game, even though I sank way more hours into the side quests and world exploration than I did into the main campaign. That's not because I didn't enjoy the main storyline, far from it, it's because there are so many worthy distractions in The Witcher 3, they were impossible for me to ignore. To put this into context, one of my friends has played close to 36 hours of the game and has unlocked 57% of the achievements, I assume by playing the main path. My playtime is currently at 62 hours and I've only unlocked 23% of the achievements. The Witcher 3 is a game I return to during times of quiet gaming because you can pick up where you left off, and it's always rewarding. Number 4. Quake 3 Arena. I'm determined to restrict myself to one game from each series, even the amazing ones, and settling on Quake 3 Arena over the first two Quakes was no easy task. The original Quake gave the world deathmatch, and was shooter fans' first taste of true 3D shooting. In every sense of the word, it was a game changer. Quake 2 had a solid campaign, amazing soundtrack, and gifted the series with the almighty railgun. But Quake 3 was arguably the most seminal and the most fun. It would go on to provide the engine for the birth of the Call of Duty and the original Half-Life franchises. Beyond this, Quake 3 was gorgeous at the time. It ran like a dream, even on low-end PCs, and like Portal's 3D puzzling, it cemented the idea that you often battled in 3 dimensions. Number 3. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. Of all the point-and-click games that came out of LucasArts during the golden age of adventure games, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis continues to be my all-time favorite. Monkey Island, Day of the Tentacle, The Dig, and Grim Fandango are all incredible, but Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis has a clever and innate replayability. It also stands as the best Indiana Jones story since Last Crusade. While the later Monkey Island games had 2 difficulty settings, Fate of Atlantis had a lengthy middle section that played out differently depending on an early game choice. You could play it as more of an action game, a puzzle-heavy experience, or with cooperative puzzles in tandem with NPC Sophia Hapgood. These 3 distinct paths meant there were a bunch of hours in the middle of the game that played out completely differently in terms of their puzzles. Number 2. Age of Empires 2: The Age of Kings. Clearly, 1999 was a hell of a year for gaming. Not counting the 2 games already listed here, it also included System Shock 2, Unreal Tournament, and Age of Empires 2: The Age of Kings. There's a lot of reasons why Age of Kings received universal acclaim, has been HDified, is set to receive a definitive edition and is beloved by fans still today. Not only did it improve on what Ensemble had built in the original Age of Empires, it added genre-defining features, like idle unit buttons, a town bell for calling villagers back to safety, and the option to customize keys for maximum actions per minute, a feature we take for granted nowadays. Before the Total War series was born, Age of Empires was the best way to have fun while learning about history, but mostly it was about building a sprawling town, appropriate defenses, and an army for taming the hostile game world. Number 1. Half-Life 2. When you work in the games industry, you've got to have an answer for what's the best game of all time, or, what's your favorite game of all time. No matter which variation of this question I get, the answer is the same: Half-Life 2. It was a 6-year wait between the original mostly fantastic Half-Life and its sequel, and Half-Life was already a game-changer, most notably in the mod space. Half-Life 2, on the other hand, is still a peerless first-person shooter experience. It doesn't need fancy RPG systems or branching narratives to be effective. Instead, it's built a top-tight shooter gameplay, amazing world building, and a narrative approach that rewards curious players eager to learn more about this subtly but beautifully realized story.